So we are Denver Agile at Scale. If you haven't joined us before, we are a proud special interest group under the umbrella of Agile Denver, and which is a group that's focused on scaling, sorry, I'm admitting people while I'm trying to talk. Scaling lean and agile practices in the enterprise. Agile Denver is a nonprofit, annually hosts the Mile High Agile Conference, which it was canceled this year. Next year, I think it's going to be in October, I heard. And it'll be a one-day event. We're super excited to bring that back. It's a great conference if you have not been. Christen is an Agile Denver board member. And so she helps put this community together and keep it going. It's a really great active community. I highly recommend joining the Slack channel, which there's a link to in the sign-up sheet. You can ask questions, you can look for jobs, you can just be part of the conversation in the community. It's a great Slack community. So I want to welcome Christen McLemore, who is, like I said, is an Agile Denver board member. She's been a coach for a long time. She's going to speak to us about scaling the portfolio wall, which is a really hard wall to climb. So I'm excited to hear what you have to tell us today, Christen.
And who am I? So this is always a hard question to answer. It's almost more difficult as I've moved out of my full-time roles and starting my own business, but I'll just give you the personal stuff because we don't hear enough about that. So I am a cross-country camper. So I don't just do Colorado camping, but I have also been to California, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, Kansas, Ohio, West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, so a bunch of different states, usually camping with people who let me park my camper in their yard or something like that so that I can actually spend some time with them, but also get some experience of camping across the country. I'm also part of a registered pet therapy team, so me and my puppers over here that I adopted about a year and a half ago, we actually visit schools as well as libraries and hospitals, and we're actually scheduled to potentially do a nursing home here coming up. And it's more just the human-animal bond. They've got a lot of people that have horses, rabbits, cats, dogs, all kinds of other animals that are part of the pet therapy program. And I also do some Agile stuff. So here I am. So what I wanted to talk with all of us, and not just talk at you, is about portfolio. And very often whenever in my previous life being a project manager and my current life being a consultant on scaling agility, I would find that a lot of folks didn't really have a solid portfolio. If they did, no one knew about it, or the people who really craved that information weren't being told what the strategy was. They didn't understand really how it was connected. So it is kind of a complicated, complex topic. So in order for us to get to sort of a starting point together, I really wanted to share a couple of terms with you and get your feedback on whether or not you feel like you know the answer to what these terms really mean. So we'll start with PMO. What does PMO stand for?
Project Management Office or Program Management Office?
Program Management, yeah, that's fine. Portfolio Management
so it's
Office?
Different. It depends on who you talk to. The P could stand for something different than what we were traditionally taught, way back. What about PPMO? Have you heard of that? Do you know what that is?
That mean different things, product portfolio management or portfolio and program management.
Yeah. So again, it depends on where you work, how they've created a new acronym in your company. But then let's get to even lower than that, project. Any of you PMI, PMP certified people?
Yes.
Yeah. I know. We always say that with such excitement. Yes. Finally, I got over that. And all of us who are, kind of beyond project management, we talk about shifting from project to product focused things and getting away from that start and end point. What about programs? What is a program?
It's a collection of projects.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe it's somewhat, but they're all aligned together like under a grouping. So
Okay.
they're related projects.
Yes. Yeah.
They
All
may,
right.
or they may be tied to a particular like division or department area within a company.
There you go.
Yeah, it
So-
could be.
And then how would that connect to portfolio? What is a portfolio?
Usually about the next level up.
Yeah, whatever that is.
Yeah,
A
but,
group of
basically it could
programs.
be like, cross multiple programs or
Yeah.
and it may not be depending on how big of a company you're at, it may not be the biggest thing. It may
Right.
be the next tier up type of thing.
Exactly. Well, so I wanted to know definitively what the answers to those questions were. So I went to the experts. And of course, you would know that I'm talking about Google and Alexa. So those are the folks that I trust. They answered me back even, and she just tried to answer me back right here. So they define project management office is typically what PMO has always stood for. You'll look at even PMI will say that, right? PPMO is actually a fairly newish term that is starting to get traction, and that is a project portfolio management office. Projects, like as you all shared, it's a temporary endeavor. That's the main part about project, is it has a definitive start and end date, scope, and hopefully a timeline. It's something unique. There's an outcome they're looking for by the end of it. Programs are just simply the groups of those projects. They are similar. They could be related to each other, but when you start looking at portfolio, typically portfolio is where you start getting into business units, P&Ls. So wherever your company size dictates how many portfolios you need or you have the funding to run that part of the business unit, then your portfolio could be that. But what I really loved about this definition is those programs could actually be different that are inside the portfolio. They're inside of the same organization. Now, for some of you, that may be the whole company, because we're not big enough to have more than one portfolio. For others, you could have several portfolios, different business units inside of it that have their own basically funding. So they almost operate independently because they have their own funding. Now, what I liked about this, though, it says it may be related or unrelated. Oh, great, right? It's kind of irritating because you're like, okay, then how do you build a portfolio and say that things are unrelated? They should be. Well, they don't have to be, because if you are a company that is getting larger through mergers, acquisitions, natural growth, then your portfolio where you started with may start to spread legs. And that's where you'll see a portfolio become like the gremlin effect. It has more, and then there's another one, and there's another one. And so as your company grows, you're going to have that. But the central theme around portfolio is that you have a global strategy to maximize the return on the investment. So I want this, and I'm willing to spend this to get it. And is there a return? Am I spending more for not what I'm going to get back? And that's the common thread across portfolios, is we're trying to evaluate every new great idea that comes our way. We have to assess how much is it going to cost us to do that thing, and is it worth it? Are we going to lose money? Sometimes we may make a strategic financial decision that we want to do something even if we lose money, but at least it was a purposeful and a well understood reason why we were going to do that. Now let's talk about the companies that you all work for. And if you are in the chat, please open that up. Or you can just use your phone. Put your phone over on using the camera app and just use this QR code. It will take you directly to Menti's website, where I've got 2 pages. You're only going to do the first page for now. And I just want to find out what of all of these exist in your company. So I just want to get a feel for how many of these things you operate in today. So I'm not asking if you're necessarily part of it, but that it exists within your company. So I'll give you a minute or two to pull that up. Okay. And while you were filling that out, I'm actually going to share my other screen so you can see it populate. All right.
Can you put that stuff in the chat room, in the
I'll
chat?
do that right now. Yes.
Yeah, if you go to menti.com, the code is 2741932. Of course, you're going to get that really fast.
I just put it in chat too.
Thank you.
Was that 8675309? What was that?
3099.
I
Yep,
couldn't
you
tell.
got it. Thank you.
Sorry.
If only you could, say yourself.
I like this Menti thing. That's really actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
You can do word clouds. It is a really cool tool.
Yeah.
It's free or?
I'm actually using the free version, so it doesn't have a ton of bells and whistles when you use the free one. You don't even have to sign up. As long as you log in, you don't have to give them any information. But all right, so pretty much everybody has a PMO and they have programs, and not too many people have the PPMO, and not too many people are only dealing with projects. So that's actually a good sign, because then it means you're in the right place for us to actually talk through this topic. All right, so with that in mind, I'm also going to give a chance for another expert to give us some feedback on what the portfolio actually is and what it's meant for. So let's talk to this expert, the PMI. So they actually look at portfolio as being the thing that ensures that your organization can leverage its project selection and execution success to achieve strategic objectives. And their research shows that the portfolio management is a way to bridge the gap between strategy and implementation. So when you look at that definition, what are the inputs that are necessary? What's one key thing that they have repeated a couple of times? What do you need in order to have a portfolio?
A strategy.
Thank you. How many of you know what your portfolio strategy is? Could you rattle it off right now? Now, do you think the people who manage your portfolio could?
Theoretically.
Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. And you kind of like, oh God, I hope. You know, because they're the ones who are actually sending all of this work to us. And I want to know that there's a reason why I'm doing this work. So as you've probably seen in a lot of different frameworks, they are all trying their best to influence leaders who are deciding what that strategy is, or hello, let's have one, so that we can then decide on what projects or what products or product suites we're actually going to have as part of this portfolio and spend the money on. Because here's the key to that. The money we are going to spend on these things, it's our salary. That's the spend. So it's the hiring and the retention of the very people that are going to have to go and execute on these strategies that we're paying for. So when we're talking about the total cost of ownership, it includes the salary, the benefits, the cost to run the business, the licenses, the software. All of those things go into the cost of it. It's not just to build it, right? So we have to measure whether or not that strategy of going here or going there, what is that going to be? So oftentimes what I have been asked to do in the life of my career was to start talking to folks in those roles to ask them, do you have a strategy? If not, we can help you build one. But you have to have the brains and the ideas in the room, because there are very, very few consultants or even full-time employees who will go into an organization and say, oh, you definitely need my help. I have all of the brilliant ideas. And you will henceforth build your strategy on my knowledge, right? We have a collective group of people that represent technology and business. They're the ones who are internal to your company. That's why they were hired. They're the ones who are going to start building that strategy, create it, and then we start to figure out, okay, well, what projects, products, any of those things do we need to change or add, or maybe acquisitions and mergers. I think we've got some feedback on somebody's phone.
Sounds like a television.
Yeah, it could be that. So what I would like for you to do right now is take a scratch piece of paper. I'm going to show you 2 videos, and you are going to start jotting down anything that you observe about the technique that you're going to watch. So whatever you happen to see in these videos, just jot it down, because when we finish one of the videos, I'm going to ask, what did you see, observe, and notice about this video? All right? So grab a sheet of paper, and we're off. And there is no sound on this one. And just in case you're worried about the toddler, that red tarp at the bottom is full of bouncy stuff. And this is only like a 4-foot wall. No children were hurt in this video. Oh, we're so close.
Wow.
Almost. Almost. Regrouping. Oh, yeah. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second so you can voice, what did you see? What were the things you observed?
I was wondering if when you take this kid home, does he climb to the top of the refrigerator in the kitchen? Right off the bat, because he was doing things that my 2 sons did at a younger age than that. And that's when you find out it's impossible to childproof some houses.
Yeah.
The kid was cute as a button.
Yeah, that's all. I couldn't see past that.
I
Those
noticed
really,
that.
you needed slightly longer legs at the top, though.
Just actually aged out a little bit. The legs got longer in that little pausing period. That's what got them over the top.
Yeah.
It worked out.
I noticed he looked back at their parents or whoever was watching
Yeah.
for encouragement.
He had no
And there's-
fears.
Yeah.
Tried different things, like when one thing didn't work, eventually would try something else.
But never gave up and got down to try a totally new path.
Yeah. Yeah. So the regrouping, you could almost see, like you could only see the back of the kid's head, but you could almost tell that they were like, okay, so this didn't work. Let me try my toes over here. And let me just say, those are probably not cheap shoes. Because they're only going to use them for what, a couple of months before they're too big, but they've got to fit to feel secure. So yeah, awesome. All right, so we're going to go to the next video. And again, sit through this one and this one actually does have audio. And then we're going to talk about the differences between the two. So jot down all the things you observe and also what was different about these 2 videos.
Later, we'll take a look at the vista here, and then come back, see how Paul's doing on that hill. On that descent. There he is. He's holding on for dear life. Look at him. Go on, Paul, you can do it. Rock climber extraordinaire. Paul Tarian.
We're working with you, encouraging you with
The cliff is eating Gabby.
the unique. Crunch, nice, crunch.
I don't let him go until you do.
Alice, are you stuck?
What happened? Uh-oh.
Put both hands on the rope, bud.
Kick off with your feet.
Okay, we're videotaping still.
Just do it. Jump out.
Oh my God. Get it, Mom, get it.
Get in the way.
Woo! Use your muscle.
Holy.
Oh, this is gonna end so badly. Oh! Whee! Ow!
Jay, you just lost.
Good job! Well. Damari, hold the rope and fall back.
All right. Let me stop this here so I can see all your faces again. So what did you notice about that one? A lot.
A lot more failure.
Yeah.
Some coordination issues.
Yeah.
For everything, everybody had safety gear.
Yeah.
They needed it.
Well, yeah, maybe. Would you make the same decisions if you didn't have safety gear?
Good question.
Yeah.
Hard to say with some of these people.
Oh.
Especially the one that was upside down between two rocks. I have a feeling that was not the way he planned it.
No.
I like the guy on the small rock. That was my favorite.
Yeah, I was thinking that was going to be, that's what the kid that started on the first video looks like 30 years later or 50 years later.
Anyone make observations about the people that were watching?
Yeah. There were more people giving input and laughing and, encouragement, jump, do things like that.
Bad advice.
They watched him fail.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we look at these two, they are showing us from a outside perspective what it looks like when people are watching you do this work and they're not necessarily invested in it. So it's easy to sit back here and look at what people are doing and say, well, gosh, why didn't they just keep their knees bent and then they could have pushed on? Because we're seeing it from a different perspective. When you're in the middle of it, trying to actually do the work, it's a very different feeling. You're stressed out. Was everybody who was climbing super happy about it? No, some of them were scared to death. Yeah. Some of them were actually comfortable and they'd done it before, but they still had a misstep, like the guy that was going through the waterfall. He looked like he maybe a little overconfident, but he was actually going to survive that. So this is the reason why I chose these two videos, was that even if you are not involved with the actual portfolio management within the company, to have some empathy for the folks who are trying to run it and realize that where you're sitting and where you're standing, watching them do that work, you might have a good perspective to help them, but the way in which you offer that feedback or you offer that help to them is really important. And if you can't see it and you want to understand it better, this is what we're going to talk about next, is how would I help? How could I help? Maybe I'm not the one that is ultimately responsible for doing all of this work in the company. So now go back to the same Menti page you were looking at earlier, but just go to the second question. And on the second question, you'll see challenges. Name some of the challenges that you believe are in your portfolio, or you are in the portfolio now and you believe these are the problems that we're having right now. So it's the same code, it's just the second page. And I will share that. So as you type it in, it should populate here.
Can you show the scan again for the barcode?
I'll have to switch, hold on. Oh, it's actually in the chat. Or do you need it for your phone?
It's easier.
Yeah, I thought so too. There you go. That work?
Thank you.
Yep. Scope change, yep. Lack of coordination, constrained resources, cost, team capacity, inactionable. Oh, I love that. We can't do that. Ambiguous. Lack of outcome focus, yeah. Somebody put in directives passed by. Can you elaborate on that?
The leader above the portfolio just directs work and tasks right past it. And so its function is not able to be served.
Got it. I like this one. It's very descriptive. Funky. Ignored. There we go. Yeah. Predefined. No cohesion. It's a free-for-all. Lack of communication. Yeah. So these are not new, right? It sounds like everyone is experiencing some of these same issues that if we were to have a more cohesive approach on how we address the portfolio strategy, then it might actually be a better strategy, and we'd understand how our work connects to that. So it doesn't happen on its own, is the point. These things have to be done deliberately, and the only way that I've seen it work is when the business and the technology leaders actually collaborate together on building a strong strategy and a plan around that, as well as the process of how we say yes, no, or maybe just not yet to the requests that come through. And sometimes really all we need is to give focus and a place for them to negotiate, and then to build a portfolio management system that actually creates alignment and the results. So what I'm going to share with you fairly quickly is the approach that I have on how do you get from where you are to getting this results-driven process. So the first thing that I recommend, and these are not very formal, this is just sort of like a brain dump of the approach that I have in the past. We've got some prep, the session itself, and it really is sort of the portfolio planning kickoff in a way. You can call it whatever you want, and then a closeout of that where it continues on. So what if I don't have a great process currently for managing the portfolio? So the first thing I would do is to figure out who are the right people that should be in the room in the first place. Because it's not just project or program managers. It needs to be people who have the ideas, so your product and your business line, but also needs to have the people who know what it takes to build the solutions for those ideas, so that's your technology leaders, and also your program and project management type of people who understand what all of this does together once you start putting projects in place. So I am not advocating necessarily that you absolutely have to change your portfolio to be non-project focused and be more product focused. You could even do this if you are still living a project life within the portfolio, because the portfolio level is agnostic of how you deliver it, right? It is, what's the scope? Is it in alignment? And then how do I communicate the priority, understand why I've chosen the things that I have, and then how do I measure the output to verify, am I going to continue to make good decisions going forward based on what we're learning in this whole cycle as it comes full circle? So first steps are figure out who are the right people to be in the room. I actually have a list of different titles. That doesn't always go against titles, but it could help. The second is to do individual interviews with those individuals prior to the kickoff session so that you can, as a facilitator or lead, understand where they're coming from. Because who has a perfectly adult, always on the same page leadership team that never has conflict?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do they have unicorns on that team too?
That's right. So because we are human beings, we are fallible, we sometimes don't get along with everybody, and we also have different ideas of what success means. It's a really good idea to have sessions, separate individual one-on-one sessions with those people who are going to be showing up in the room and find out from them, what do you think success looks like if we get this right? What interest do you have in doing this? Where do we need to be aware of potholes or problems that might arise either during the session or in the future that I need to be aware of so that I can represent the whole group effectively? And then communicate that agenda based on what you've gathered from those individuals. That's just a high-level pass of the prep steps. The session itself consists of a little bit more than what I've shown here, but I just wanted enough time to hit some highlights. So if you've done these before, you probably have more things on the agenda than I've listed. But the first thing is to map the value stream. And this comes from Karen Martin, and I always forget the other author's name, Mapping the Value Stream. It's a process reengineering similar to that process. Many of you have already heard about it. And I want to be clear that we're mapping the as-is state of the work, not the to-be. And as soon as we start to go off on tangents of, well, we don't like how this works, so we want to change it, table it. Put it on the parking lot, because we have to map what we currently do, because just as in lean systems and Kanban, we need to understand what we do today. Oh, thank you very much, Robin. We want to know exactly what we do today so that we can say, all right, we're going to measure everything the way we actually do it. And by the way, when you do this session, you will often have people who argue about whether or not that's the way we actually do things. And that's why we do this session as well, because people might say things like, oh my gosh, why do we do that? Oh, I didn't know we do that. Why don't we change that? These are the kind of comments that will come up almost every single time we do a session like that. And that's good, because now we're actually listing out all the things that we might want to address. But before we just go and change it all, we also need to verify, did that change have the expected outcome that we wanted or not? So just like we ask teams to do experimentation on their process on how they get better at delivering software, we're going to do the same thing at the portfolio levels. We're going to figure out where we think it's broken, and then piece by piece start making some changes and determine which ones actually had a better impact, or had the impact that we were expecting. We also want to establish a more economic decision-making model, and this becomes difficult for a lot of folks because you'll either have the loudest, the hippos, right, the highest important person in the room or the biggest voice or whatever. But if we can all collectively agree on, these are the ways in which we make decisions, and these are how we're going to rank things consistently, no matter who brings up the idea or what the idea is about, then it's less of an argument about whether or not something should be a higher priority, or it should be even in the portfolio if we can actually look back at the money and the dollars on it. And that's a very specific company model. I'll show you some examples here in a moment on how we did that, or how I've done that with a couple of customers. Then we evaluate the work we have right now that's in flight, measuring the difference between the value and the effort. So it's kind of an ROI, but we actually do it on a scale, and I'll show you that here in a moment. And then we want to capture all of the work that's currently in flight on the portfolio Kanban that we build. And I'll show you an example. At the end of the session, the expectation is that we have consensus on who is going to attend the portfolio review meetings going forward and what cadence that we're going to have them. Some of them might need to be every week, every 2 weeks, or maybe once a month or once a quarter. It just depends on how much actually flows through your system in a given period of time to really determine what the right cadence is. And then of course the agenda, like what are we going to cover and things like that. Now the next is, and I'm sorry, my mouse has decided to die on me. Okay, old finger. Okay, so this is just a sample portfolio planning kickoff agenda. And it was in an email that I sent out in advance after I had already interviewed everyone. And I've highlighted the things that would obviously change based on what you find. But it was somewhat of a template where we would say, our objective is to build an agile portfolio management system that will help us to accelerate growth, revenue, profit by responding to new market pressures and stakeholder needs with remarkable transparency and speed, because that's what we're all after, right? Now, what we're going to address, and then based on everybody's feedback, where were our pain points, what's broken, what's working, that kind of stuff, I would summarize those things because it reiterates to everyone that I collected all this information from all of you, and here's where we feel like it's going to make the biggest impact if we can get this right or make it better. Then list out any other pertinent things that we're going to address while we're in the room. Now, for me, these kickoff sessions usually lasted between a day and 3 days. So it is not an easy thing because if we're actually mapping the value stream for the first time, that in itself sometimes takes a full day or a half day, possibly more. And you can only imagine that there are people who will say, I can't be in 3 days sessions. So then you have to work out the agenda of when they're needed and when they're not. And so it becomes a little bit of a calendar Tetris if you get my drift. Now here's a list of people that I typically reach out to depending on how big the organization is. So yes, sometimes I invite a COO or a CIO or a CTO because they may have a smaller company where there is only 1 or maybe 3 portfolios, and I want them involved in the first attempt to clean up or start a portfolio management system. And I want their input. I want them to see how it works. Lots of other roles in here. Director of operations, principal software architect. I have chief architects. Sometimes you're a chief business owner, product owners. Excuse me, I'm saying product owner, I meant product manager or solutions manager, whatever the terms are in your company that are appropriate. So these are all the folks that I'm including. And then we take a huge wall, or in this case, we didn't have a wall. We had poster paper from the butcher block paper. And we started mapping out the whole process. So we started out with what are the triggers that initiate work to even be considered. So where are those things coming from? Do we have inside innovation teams? Do we have business people who are saying, hey, I'd love to do this? Or is it coming from outside, like the government? Because we have SEC regulations that we have to follow. Wherever those come from, we map all of them as input. And then we start mapping out the entire process. I won't go into a lot of detail here because that's a whole nother session about value stream mapping. But one of the key things that we learned in this particular scenario was that they had a separate innovation pipeline that they actually labeled it and trademarked it in their company that way. And then they had another pipeline of maintenance, support, and regular keep the lights on. But what I found out by doing this process was it's the same exact people who do the development and testing on those things. So I asked them, why couldn't you combine it somewhere in the process rather than having 2 value streams? You actually only have 1 because you're basically piling it on. So how do I know if your #1 innovation project is not more important or less important than something that's a data migration or an upgrade or something like that? And they're like, oh yeah, well you're actually describing the problem we have right now about fighting over resources. I'm like, okay, so we have to make those decisions earlier. So there might be a fork in the road that actually goes backwards. We need to funnel this down into a central backlog. And that's, instead of throwing, I think, gosh, who were we talking to? It was either Roger or someone else earlier, where we were saying you got to take all the Agile words out of it. Because as soon as you throw Agile words in there, then they're going to argue about your Agile words. So just talk brass tacks, just like, hey, well, how do we make decisions on which one to do first or where to put our money? Because that's essentially what we're talking about when we say prioritization. So I even take that P word out because sometimes that alone is a trigger thing. It's like a hot button for everybody in the room. So once we have that, Then I have something that I've been working on for a couple of years now, and that's my own version of the portfolio canvas. And I know the text is way too small for you to be able to read this, and that's okay. But we took basically everything on the left-hand side was what are your strategic themes, your economic decision-making model, and your budget. Those are all the things we need to know and establish before we can even start looking at new stuff. In the center is the pipeline. So the top row is that value stream map. But under it, we also needed to identify, well, who is involved in each of these steps when we take it through this value stream mapping exercise. And then below that, where in the process of building backlogs all the way up from strategy and themes down to user stories, how do we map that out? Because I was trying to help the portfolio leaders as well as the other executives understand how all this creates alignment. Is here are your themes, which map to, and I'm just going to throw out safe terms here because most of you have heard of them before, but how does your strategy map to your epics, map to your capabilities, to your features, to your user stories, and then a little bit of tooling discussion, but not specific to a particular tool, but just showing the relationship. So they would understand, here's where you're already building your backlog inside of your tool, but no developer has written a single code. Your analysts haven't even done any research on it. Right now, we're still in the deciding phase. And then on the right-hand side was, once we've completed work, what are those methods and techniques that we're using to manage and monitor the progress? So for example, what are our portfolio performance metrics? Meaning, how quickly do we get things to go through the system no matter what they are? A lot of Kanban metrics will come in through this pipeline. Then there's value metrics and measurements, which is what we decided to say yes to. Did it reap the results we were hoping to get? So either a reduction in cost, an increase in revenue, an increase in customer satisfaction, whatever those categories were that we initially said would come true if we did this thing, did it come true? Has it actually helped us to achieve a strategic goal in that time frame? And then there's the cost view and the revenue view at dollars and cents. So if you didn't catch it earlier, I do invite the CTO or his delegate to this, because they're actually filling in the blanks on the right and the left-hand side. And oftentimes portfolio folks are not in connection with those folks. And there's a disparity, especially when they're going from traditional project management to Agile methods. They're trying to figure out, how do I manage cost with this whole model? When you're changing it on me, you're kind of like building the house while I'm still trying to put furniture in. So it's a helpful discussion to have them included in this as part of the learning, as well as the information sharing as once you start putting it in there. The economic decision-making framework, how many of you are actually familiar with that, at least that term? Like, how do we decide the monetary reasons behind? So it might be a new concept for some people. Okay. So this is something that your finance team, as well as your business leaders, are likely already discussing. You may just not be privy to it. So having those two groups of individuals come in the room and explain to us, how do you decide? How should we decide on the yeses and the nos and the not yets or the nevers? What are we basing it on? Some frameworks will, like SAFe, they talk about WSJF, weighted shortage job first, and as a way to measure prioritization. That's slightly different than what we're talking about here. This actually goes up a little bit higher to strategy, where we're saying, here's the strategy and here are the results. And as a larger organizational view, what are the criteria that we're trying to move? So think of all of the needles we're trying to move in the business to either go public because we're private now, or to get a bigger market share, or whatever those bigger things are. Will this idea, i.e. initiative or project, actually move the needle or not? And then they put thresholds on each category, and that is the evaluation of everything that comes through the pipeline. So once you have that decision-making model, then everyone has to sign off on it in the room to say, this is what we will be using going forward. And it basically populates what I was showing earlier as the left-hand side of the canvas and the right-hand side of the canvas. So we would know what the input stuff is, and then we would know how we're going to measure it once we start producing. Now, another aspect of what was important for us to do is to look at the stuff that's already in flight. And I had a few projects that weren't, but they were coming up soon when I did this exercise with them. But it's super rudimentary. And by the way, you'll notice that the graphics are all blurred out, and that was to protect the innocent and the guilty, because this was actually customer stuff and I didn't want to share things that I'm not allowed to share. So NDA and all. So on the left-hand side is low to high cost or effort. And the bottom x-axis was low to high value. And what we have them do is we draw these circles almost like a rainbow on the lower right-hand side. So if you have low cost, high value things, those should be up at the top of the list. Those are the higher priority things. As you start moving over to the left, lower value and higher cost, those are probably going to get shoved down the list. So this is another option to use at a higher level within the portfolio. It's an alternative to the WSJF, but it's a simple one that's been out there for a long time. And essentially what I would do is every single project that was out there, I'd have it on a Post-it note over on the left-hand side of the table. And I would have the business come by the table first. And all I would ask them to do is compare all of these stickies and move them from left to right across the bottom, but don't move it up and down. Just move it from left to right and tell us as a group which projects have high value, low value, comparatively same, and stuff like that. So they would have that there. Then they would step away from the table, and the technologist folks in engineering would say, okay, I'm not going to move your stuff left or right. We've already talked through that if there was anything that was necessary. Now all I'm going to do is move it up. And if I move it up, it's because the effort to do that work is higher or lower than the others. So they're also relatively doing that. Then I come back and draw the circles, those arcs. And that tells us bottom right-hand corner, definitely we should consider these are higher priority. Now, what was interesting about this exercise is that it took us about an hour, and we only had, what is that, like 15 or 20 projects. Some of those were already in flight, and look how far to the left and up they were. So it immediately gave everyone feedback that we're working on possibly the wrong things. We're putting our efforts on choosing things that we are now realizing we should stop throwing good money at bad decisions. But it was a conversation that all of us needed to have in the room together to get to that result. Because if we just talk about spreadsheets and numbers like WSJF, it just wasn't resonating with them. It didn't work. So this exercise was moving things left to the right and then moving it up and down with the two groups and their perspective on what it was costing and what its value was like, oh shit. And sometimes you need that reaction from those individuals, because then they're like, oh, okay, what do we do now? So that's the next step. This is when we started talking about the portfolio Kanban. So I took all those same stickies and then we put it on the board to say, okay, where in this process from left to right are those projects currently at? And could we remove them? Could we stall them? Should we table them? Should we just keep going? Because there were also contractual obligations with some customers who were asking for these things that there was no way we were going to be able to stop doing it. But it did give us a set point to say, okay, well, in the future, before we even get into contract negotiations, now we know we have a better model to help guide us on what decisions we will say, or what opportunities we'll say yes or no to. So this is super rudimentary. And by the way, when we first did this, from the moment this picture was taken, less than a month later, we adjusted it because we realized that it wasn't quite right. That is another good thing that can happen out of these things, is that we play around with it and then we realize, oh, shoot, idea should be this, or business case should be this. So we listed out what are all the things that we say we're going to do when it's in these states. And the key things I want to really drive home here is that, first of all, everything is visible. Now everybody knows exactly where stuff is. Also, because we're talking about it at a higher level, we aren't going to see a ton of movement every week, maybe not even every month. And that's not a bad thing, because remember, these are very high level things that these are buckets of things that possibly could take quarters to do. So when we look at the build column here on the right, those are the things that are currently in flight. So if you have people working on it in this current quarter, it could sit there for this quarter and maybe even next quarter, because work is being done, but it's not complete yet. So these are just sort of rough ideas of what the Kanban system could do for you. By the way, I should mention too, WIP limits. We didn't know what we should put on there yet. And I was not in a position to tell them what they should do. I said, you know what, for now, let's just look at where it currently is. And I'm going to go back and talk to the teams and find out how, historically, how quickly do these things move in. And we actually found out that it could take 6 months to a year before anything would actually move out of the build state because of the way that things were working. And again, we hadn't really looked at getting better at the development side. We were focused on portfolio. So if this is the truth, now we have somewhere to start on figuring out how do we get things to move a little bit quicker. But we got to start measuring it now to know how much better it's getting. And so that was like our first step, is to help educate them. That's why this doesn't go very fast, because the stuff we're sending to them actually takes 6 to 9 months, maybe even a year to complete. So that also means that the cadence of portfolio review sessions, either new intake, we don't do that often. We might only do that once a quarter, but the agenda for the monthly ones is just to track the progress or to highlight any things that are coming up from the teams that we need to address as a portfolio team. So I won't belabor that point, but I just wanted to point that out. Now it is 3 minutes to 7. So instead of doing the breakout, Sally, I think we're just going to do this as an open discussion. And if we can just paste those same questions into the chat.
Yep, I'll do that.
Thank you. So when you think about everything we've talked about and consider your role in the portfolio or not, what are some of the challenges that you are currently facing? And do you think any of what we have discussed so far could be a way to improve it? Maybe if it's just even a tidbit of something.
So I'm curious, how do you convince leaders to really look at the size of a portfolio, or is there a size of a portfolio that you should really think about? Like my company is a huge company, and they have they don't really, like, their portfolio management looks at everything. So it's almost like it's taking, but instead of actually managing it.
Well, it kind of depends on the role that you play, right? So where do you fit within that model? Are you a recipient of what they decide, or are you part of the review?
I'm part of managing the tracking of it.
Okay. That's, yeah. All of a sudden I'm like,
it's all, I mean, really, I think the portfolio management ends up being a tracking when in a situation like that.
Well, and that, I think that's the key there too, is that a lot of times portfolio folks really get stuck in this, I'm just tracking. It's like the commercial for Dunkin' Donuts back in the 80s. I got to make the donuts. I got to make the donuts. You know, it's like you just keep doing the same thing over and over again because that's my job. But it takes someone, and it could be you, Sally, who says, I feel like there's some measurements of output and results that I'd love to see. I feel like I want to be a data scientist with this. And it's more of a curiosity, a question of maybe, what if we were to do something? And if you have enough leverage or even the leeway and the time to pair up with someone who is part of that process, to share with them or investigate further, I think that's sort of the first step. Because if you don't own the PMO or whatever it is in your company, it's a difficult discussion to walk into the room and say, you guys could be doing a whole lot better. Let me show you. Nobody welcomes that kind of an approach, but the sense of curiosity and the wanting to learn more and saying, oh, I have this idea, I learned this thing, and how about we try it? Or where would I get the data to tell me more information? It could be as simple as even going to the product side, the business side, and asking those questions too, because a lot of this is, we are really good as Agilists about educating people about how to make a better sausage making machine, but we're not always the right people to tell the recipe of the sausage. That's product management. Product management is responsible for building the sausage recipe that people will want to buy and give away as Christmas presents. And then, every season, everybody wants our sausage because we have like the best sausage out there. And we have the best sausage making machine out there too. so we can keep up with the demand. And that's that two-sided, seesaw that I see. We sit on one side. We don't really play nicely with the other side. And that's kind of a long-term thing.
Yeah.
I think, Kristen, I see it as a long game. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is people don't align around a long game. It's key to the whole strategy in terms of how people should be operating businesses. So I liked what you showed, that you build transparency. This should be a board. It shouldn't be a document on some page that it gets stale and nobody's living it, right? You should know exactly where you fit in the strategy, because if I'm building something, I could build the wrong thing just because it's kind of cool. And I've got some developers that like to play with different technology. And I won't make the right decision. But from my standpoint at the project level, I really don't care what tech they use. What's the easiest thing? What's the thing that we can get out? But if your strategy is this is a long-term vision, makes a difference in the choices that I make. Because if you're looking for people in the staffing and you're resource constrained, why wouldn't I make sure I'm using technology that applies across your tech stack and not create a whole new tech stack that you have to find people that are not necessarily less interchangeable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's good. Transparency is good.
Well, and to your point, having the alignment, transparency creates alignment, hopefully, right? It's not a one-to-one, but it's the first step, is that we all understand. A lot of times what I would be frustrated about was, I don't know why they're making the decisions they're making on what projects that we do. Mm-hmm. So because I don't understand it, I sometimes will have an objection that is not necessarily valid because I don't see that bigger picture that they see. But if they don't share it with me, then I can't get excited about it, or I may choose not to because I feel like I've got a different perspective. I remember years ago working at AOL, we had a project that was a multi-million-dollar new thing. It was supposed to save the company, and I got put on as one of the program directors for the project, and I read the scope and the basically was like a lean business case for it, and I was like, I wouldn't buy this. I was like, this is a dumb idea. And I definitely didn't say it that way, but I told the product director, I was like, I don't know. I feel like I'm missing something here because I don't feel, maybe I'm not the right audience. And so we talked through it, and, it turns out that the best thing that came out of that is I had a really nice ceramic coffee mug, but that was it. So yeah, I think sharing more about why we make the decisions that we make, and that's really why I feel so strongly about having this kind of a session to get everybody on the same page, and then communicate it. Tell everybody about why we're doing things the way we do. It's one of the reasons why I think that SAFE has actually done something really well, where as part of their PI planning agenda, they actually have technology and business leaders who explain, here is where we're going in 3 to 5 years, and here's how this quarter's work actually connects to that strategy. A lot of other frameworks don't really highlight that as much as SAFE does. So I do appreciate that part.
Cool.
Yeah, I also like that you make it visible from each one of the parties that you can, a lot of times you go in there, everybody wants how big is this before you make the priority, how important it is. They go the other way, tell me how important it is and I'll tell you how big it is. And then you can decide whether it's worthwhile or not.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's one of those, I was thinking the same thing, looking at the way you visualized everything, it's one of those things that I know what I've seen in a company that you can't use Agile words, is that they would resist doing that type of exercise, but then find it incredibly valuable to see that visualization and to actually walk through the process.
And, I'm not ashamed to say that when they get to that moment where everybody goes, oh, I love that. Not because I've proved them wrong. It's because they got to the answer on their own.
Yeah.
And that's what makes such a huge difference. If you, it doesn't matter how many times you will tell someone the sky is blue, until they walk outside and see what blue looks like, especially here in Colorado, let me tell you, that's blue. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to share one last thing before we go. And I'm certainly available to stay on for a little bit longer too, but just in case people need to hop off. This is my encouragement to anyone who's been part of attempts to make the portfolio better, or you're in the midst of trying to get a better portfolio. And that is just remember, if you're going to climb the wall, you're going to fall, you're going to hit the mud, but don't do it alone. Bring everybody with you. A couple years ago when we were trying to do a lot of this stuff at my last, actually a couple companies ago, we did the Spartan race together out in Northern Virginia. And it was one of the best team building events that we'd ever had. And it made a big difference because everybody participated and we all kind of went at our own pace. But the folks who finished first came back through the course and helped me because I was not in the beginning of the pack. But you can see like we were kind of excited at the beginning, but look how happy we were we finished. And we were dirty. I mean, it was muddy. So
That's awesome.
That's the really critical part about all of the stuff we do in Agile is this is not a one and done game. It is not you, the hero. It is we, the team. And I cannot emphasize that enough, is that you need people who will stand beside you, lock arms with you and say, Red Rover, we're coming over, right? Just to make it happen. Whoops, I just lost my remote. All right, well, thank you so much. I appreciate the time, Sally.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Does anyone have further questions? And if I think we kind of reached the official or the formal end, but feel free to stick around if you want to talk to Christen or share anything.
Yeah,
and I put the sign up in. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thanks, Christen.
Take care.